The millionaire played dead until the maid revealed a secret he was never meant to hear. Welcome to True Soul Narratives, where every story carries a heartbeat. Love, betrayal, kindness, forgiveness, and the courage to start again. Before we start, comment below and let us know where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Theo Brennan lay perfectly still in his bed, eyes closed, chest rising and falling in the careful rhythm of sleep. But he wasn't sleeping. He was wide awake, every nerve in his body screaming at him to open his eyes, to sit up, to stop this charade. But he didn't. He couldn't. Because the woman sitting beside him, the new maid who'd been working in his house for barely 3 weeks, had just taken his hand in both of hers. Her fingers trembled. Her voice broke as she whispered, "Mr. Brennan, please don't leave yet. I still need to tell you something." His heart raced so loud he feared she could hear it, but he forced himself to stay motionless, to keep breathing steadily, to listen. What she whispered next would shatter everything he thought he knew about his past, his mother's death, and the stranger who'd been working beside him for weeks. A secret so devastating it would crack open the walls he had spent 26 years building. But to understand this moment, to understand why this woman was crying over a man who'd barely acknowledged her existence, we need to go back to earlier that morning. Theo Brennan was 42 years old and he'd built an empire from absolutely nothing. A real estate mogul who'd turned abandoned properties into luxury developments, who'd made his first million by 30 and his first 100 million by 35. But money hadn't bought him what everyone assumed it would. It hadn't bought him peace. They called him the Ice King, cold, emotionless, controlled. His business partners feared him. His competitors respected him but kept their distance. Even his own staff walked on eggshells, speaking in hushed tones whenever he entered a room. That's what happens when you never smile, never show weakness, never let anyone see past the armor. Theo lived alone in a sprawling, modern estate on the outskirts of the city, all glass walls and sharp angles and spaces too large for one person. The house echoed with emptiness, but he preferred it that way. Empty meant safe. Empty meant no one could get close enough to hurt him. The truth that no one knew, that Theo would never admit, was that he was exhausted. Bone-deep, soul-crushing exhaustion that came from years of performing strength he didn't feel. He was lonely, surrounded by people who wanted his money, his influence, his signature on contracts, but never him. Just him. His staff kept their distance because that's what he'd trained them to do. His business partners feared him because fear was easier than trust. And he had no real connections, no friends, no family, because he deliberately cut every thread that might tie him to another human being. It was safer that way, less painful. He'd learned that lesson at 16 when his mother died. The official story was an accident. She'd fallen during a business trip, suffered fatal injuries, died before the ambulance arrived. But the details had always been vague, incomplete, and Theo had never gotten closure, never understood what really happened, never got to say goodbye. That loss had hollowed him out, turned him into someone who couldn't afford to love because love meant loss and loss meant pain. He couldn't survive twice. This particular morning had started like so many others, brutal. A board meeting at 6 a.m., his partners circling like sharks, questioning a merger deal Theo had structured. There were whispers of a hostile takeover attempt. Lawyers sliding contracts across the polished table with demands for immediate signatures. Voices rising in barely controlled arguments about risk and liability. Theo had sat at the head of the table, expression blank, voice steady, handling every challenge with icy precision. He betrayed no emotion, no frustration, no exhaustion, even though he'd been awake for 72 hours straight. Sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford when vultures were trying to tear apart everything he'd built. The meeting stretched for 3 hours. By the time it ended, Theo's jaw ached from clenching it so tight, his shoulders felt like stone, and his vision had started to blur at the edges. But he stood, shook hands with the necessary people, made the necessary threats disguised as professional warnings, and walked out of that boardroom like he owned the world. He returned home just after noon, his driver pulling up to the estate's front entrance. Staff appeared immediately, as they always did. The housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, greeted him with her usual nervous efficiency. "Mr. Brennan, your lunch is ready whenever you'd like." He dismissed her with a wave, his voice clipped and cold. "Not hungry. Hold all calls." He walked straight to his home office, a massive room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking acres of manicured lawn. More contracts waited on his desk. More decisions that would affect hundreds of Ds, millions of dollars. Futures that hinged on his signature. Theo sat down, pulled the first folder toward him, and tried to focus. The words swam on the page. His vision blurred again, worse this time. The room tilted slightly, just a degree or two, but enough to make his stomach lurch. He gripped the edge of his desk, knuckles white, forcing himself to breathe through it. Then the room spun violently, and Theo Brennan collapsed. Mrs. Chen found him 10 minutes later, sprawled on the floor of his office, unconscious, his expensive suit wrinkled, one arm twisted at an awkward angle beneath him. She screamed. Staff came running. Someone had the sense to call it his private doctor, a privilege of wealth that meant medical care arrived at your home instead of waiting in emergency rooms with ordinary people. Dr. Martinez arrived within 20 minutes, medical bag in hand, calm and professional. He examined Theo quickly, checking pulse, pupils, breathing. The staff hovered anxiously in the doorway, whispering among themselves. "Is he dying? Did he have a heart attack? Should we call someone?" Dr. Martinez straightened, snapping his bag closed. Severe exhaustion, stress-induced fainting. Nothing life-threatening, but his body has reached its limit. He needs complete rest. No work, no stress, just sleep and recovery. They moved him carefully, 2 staff members supporting his weight as they carried him upstairs to his bedroom. Laid him on the bed, removed his shoes, loosened his tie. Dr. Martinez supervised, giving quiet instructions. As they settled him against the pillows, Theo began to regain consciousness. Not fully, not obviously, but awareness crept back in fragments. The softness of his bed beneath him. Voices speaking above him like he wasn't there. His body felt heavy, disconnected, like it belonged to someone else. He was half awake, disoriented, caught in that strange space between sleep and waking where everything felt distant and muffled. Then he heard them, staff whispering just outside his bedroom door, thinking he couldn't hear. Mrs. Chen's voice, anxious. "Should we call his relatives?" "Someone should be notified." Dr. Martinez's response was quiet but clear. "Does he have any?" A pause. Then Mrs. Chen again, sadder this time. "No one. He's completely alone." Those words cut through Theo's fog like a blade. Completely alone. It was true, and hearing it spoken aloud made it unbearably real. He had no one, no family, no friends, no one who would care if he lived or died beyond the professional obligation of paid employees. Theo realized in that moment that he was awake. His mind had cleared enough to understand where he was, what had happened. He could open his eyes if he wanted, could sit up, dismiss everyone, pretend this humiliation had never occurred. But he didn't. He kept his eyes closed, his breathing steady and deep, mimicking sleep. Why? He wasn't entirely sure. Maybe he wanted peace, just a few more minutes of not having to perform strength. Maybe he was curious what people truly said when they thought he couldn't hear. Or maybe he was just so tired of the world, so exhausted from carrying the weight of his own isolation, that he needed to disappear for a moment, to not be Theo Brennan, the Ice King, the feared millionaire, to just be no one. Dr. Martinez's voice drifted back in. Let him rest. Someone should stay with him for the next few hours, just to monitor. If anything changes, call me immediately. Mrs. Chen responded quickly. I'll send in the new girl. Miss Carson? She's reliable. Theo's mind registered the name vaguely. Miss Carson, the new maid. She'd been working at the estate for 3 weeks, maybe a month, hired to replace someone who'd quit, though Theo couldn't remember the details because he never paid attention to staff changes. He'd barely noticed her at all. She was quiet, kept her head down, moved through the house like a shadow. Never spoke unless spoken to, and even then, her responses were brief and deferential. Just another employee in a house full of people who worked for his money, who tolerated his coldness because the paycheck was worth it. He had no idea why Mrs. Chen would choose her specifically, but it didn't matter. Theo kept his eyes closed, his decision made. He would stay like this, pretending unconsciousness, and see what happened when people thought he couldn't hear them. Sophia Carson was 28 years old, and she'd been working at the Brennan estate for exactly 3 weeks and 2 days. To everyone else, she was unremarkable. Quiet, efficient, almost invisible in the way good household staff were supposed to be. She cleaned rooms, organized spaces, followed instructions without question. The other staff barely knew her. She didn't join their gossip sessions during breaks, didn't share personal stories, kept herself separate in a way that was polite but distant. But if anyone had looked closer, they might have noticed things. The way Sophia watched Theo Brennan with careful, observant eyes whenever he passed through a room, the way she took extra care with his spaces, his office, his study, straightening books with deliberate gentleness, dusting frames with something that looked like reverence. The other staff gossiped constantly about how cold he was, how impossible to please, how lonely he seemed rattling around this massive house alone. Sophia never joined those conversations. She just listened, her expression unreadable, carrying herself with a strange sadness, like she was bearing a weight no one else could see. She'd volunteered for the difficult shifts, the early mornings and late evenings when she might cross paths with Mr. Brennan. No one questioned it. It did. Extra hours meant extra pay, and if the new girl wanted to work herself to exhaustion, that was her choice. But Sophia wasn't doing it for the money. She was doing it because she needed to be near him, needed to watch him, needed to find the courage to tell him something she'd been carrying for 12 years. A secret that had shaped her entire life. A truth he deserved to know, but that she was terrified to speak. If you're drawn to stories about secrets that change everything, about connections that transcend time, subscribe to True Soul Narratives. We bring you emotional journeys that remind you why every act of kindness matters. Now, as Sophia climbed the stairs to Theo Brennan's bedroom, carrying a bowl of warm water and a clean cloth like Dr. Martinez had instructed, her hands trembled. This was it. He was unconscious, vulnerable, unable to stop her from speaking. She could finally tell him the truth. Or she could stay silent, like she had for 3 weeks, and let the secret rot inside her forever. Her hand hesitated on the door handle. Then she took a breath, steadied herself, and walked inside. The door opened quietly, the hinges barely whispering. Theo, eyes still closed, heard footsteps entering his bedroom. Hesitant steps, careful and slow, like someone afraid of disturbing something sacred. She was alone with him now. He could tell by the singular rhythm of movement, the way the air shifted with just one person's presence. Sophia set something down on the nightstand beside his bed. The soft clink of porcelain against wood. The bowl of warm water Dr. Martinez had requested, probably a cloth for his forehead. Her hands were trembling slightly. Theo couldn't see it, but he could hear it in the way the water rippled, the faint tremor in her breathing. She pulled the chair closer to his bedside and sat down. Then came silence, long, heavy silence, broken only by her breathing, slightly uneven, like she was trying to steady herself for something difficult. Theo waited, his own heartbeat loud in his ears, wondering what she would do. Would she just sit there quietly until someone relieved her? Would she check his pulse and leave? Then Sophia did something completely unexpected. She took his hand in both of hers. Her touch was warm, gentle, almost reverent. Theo's first instinct was to pull away, to open his eyes and demand to know what she thought she was doing. But he didn't. He stayed frozen, feeling her fingers wrap around his, holding on like his hand was something precious and fragile. Then she spoke. Her voice was barely a whisper, so quiet he had to strain in to hear it. "Mr. Brennan, please don't leave this world yet." Theo's heart skipped a beat, his chest tightening, but he forced himself to stay perfectly still, to keep his breathing even and deep. "I still need to tell you something." Her tone was gentle, breaking with emotion, full of something Theo hadn't heard from staff in, well, ever. Nobody spoke to him like this, like he was a person, not a boss, like his life mattered beyond the contracts he signed and the money he generated. She reached for the damp cloth, wrung it out carefully, and placed it on his forehead. The touch was tender, almost loving, the way someone might care for family. I know you think none of us care about you, she continued, her voice thick with unshed tears, that we're all just here for the paycheck, that you're alone in this house even when it's full of people. But that's not true, Sophia whispered. At least not for me. Theo's mind raced. Why would she care about him specifically? They'd barely spoken in the 3 weeks she'd been here. He'd been nothing but cold and distant, treating her like furniture, like part of the house that existed to serve him. What could possibly make her speak to him this way, with such emotion, such pain in her voice? But he forced himself to remain still, forced himself to keep listening, even though every instinct screamed at him to open his eyes and demand answers. Something in her tone sounded like guilt, like she was confessing something that had been eating her alive. Sophia's voice shook as she continued, I've been hiding something for years, something about your past. Theo's chest tightened so hard he thought his breathing might give him away. His past? What could this woman, this stranger, possibly know about his past? And I'm so sorry I didn't have the courage to tell you sooner. Her grip on his hand tightened, as if she was afraid he might slip away before she could get the words out. You don't remember me, sir, but I remember you. Those words hit Theo like electricity. Remember her? From where? When? You saved my life once, 12 years ago, when you were still building your first company, working those insane hours, trying to prove yourself to everyone who doubted you. Theo's mind spun backward, searching through memories he'd buried under years of success in carefully constructed walls. 12 years ago, he would have been 30, still fighting to establish his first major development deal, working out of a cramped office downtown, staying late into the night because he couldn't afford to fail. When you were just a stranger who stopped to help a terrified girl, and then the memory hit him like a physical blow. Late night, he'd been leaving his office building around 11, exhausted, keys in hand, when he'd heard it. Screaming. A woman's scream, high-pitched and terrified, coming from the alley that ran behind the building. Every logical part of his brain had said, keep walking, call the cops from your car, don't get involved. But he hadn't walked away. He'd run toward the sound. The memory flooded back in sharp, vivid detail. A young woman, couldn't have been more than 16 or 17, pressed against the alley wall by 3 men. They weren't asking for money. This was something worse. Theo had shouted, his voice echoing off the brick walls, demanding they back off. They'd turn, surprised someone had the stupidity to interfere. And for a moment, Theo had thought he'd made a terrible mistake. But he'd already pulled out his phone, already called 911, and the approaching sirens had made the decision for everyone. The men had scattered. The girl had collapsed against the wall, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. Theo had stayed with her, speaking in low, calm tones, making sure she was okay, making sure the police arrived, making sure she got home safely. She'd thanked him over and over, her voice shaking, her gratitude almost overwhelming. And then Theo had gone home, filed the incident away as just something that happened, something anyone would have done. He'd never thought about her again. Not once in 12 years. Could that terrified girl have been Sophia? I never forgot your face, Sophia said, tears falling freely now. Theo could feel them landing on the back of his hand, warm and wet. I spent years trying to find you, to thank you properly, to tell you what that moment meant to me, what you saved me from that night. Her voice cracked completely. But by the time I tracked you down, you'd become this untouchable figure, surrounded by security teams and personal assistants and lawyers. Walls so high no one could ever reach you. So I applied to work here. Told myself maybe I could repay the kindness somehow. Maybe I could find a way to show you that what you did mattered, that it changed everything for me. Theo's throat felt tight, his eyes stinging behind closed lids. This woman, this quiet shadow who'd been moving through his house for weeks, had been there all along because of something he'd done 12 years ago and completely forgotten. But you're so lonely, Sophia whispered, and the pain in her voice was almost unbearable to hear. So tired. I watch you move through this house like a ghost, and I don't know how to help you. I don't know how to reach you. Theo was overwhelmed, drowning in emotions he'd spent decades learning to suppress. Someone from his past, someone he'd helped without expecting anything in return, had been beside him all this time. Someone who remembered a kindness he'd forgotten, who'd cared enough to track him down, to find a way back into his life just to say thank you. Tears stung behind his closed eyelids, threatening to slip free and give him away. But he stayed perfectly still, breathing steady, because he could feel there was more. The way her voice trembled, the way her hands gripped his, like she was holding herself together by sheer will, told him this wasn't the end of her confession. There was something else, something bigger, something that was tearing her apart to finally speak aloud. And Theo, lying there in the darkness behind his own eyelids, braced himself for whatever truth was coming next. Because he knew with the certainty of someone who'd spent years running from his own pain, that whatever Sophia was about to say would change everything. Sophia's voice dropped to barely audible, almost disappearing into the quiet of the room. And there's something else, something about your mother. Theo's entire body went rigid, every muscle locked, his breath catching in his throat. He almost broke character right then, almost opened his eyes and sat up and demanded she stop talking. Because his mother's death was the wound that had never healed, the pain he carried in his chest every single day for 26 years. The official story had always been simple, clinical, incomplete. She'd fallen during a business trip, died from her injuries before help arrived. But it had never made sense to Theo. The details were too vague, the circumstances too unclear. He'd spent years believing he should have been there, that somehow he could have prevented it, that her death was his fault for not protecting her. And now this stranger, this woman he barely knew, was about to tell him something about that night. Your mother, Sophia said, her voice shaking so violently she could barely form words. She didn't die the way they told you. Sophia was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face, her breathing coming in short gasps as she struggled to speak through the emotion. She died saving me. Theo felt like he'd been punched in the chest, all the air leaving his lungs at once. What? That was impossible. His mother and Sophia? How could they possibly be connected? His mind raced, trying to make sense of it, trying to connect dots that seemed impossibly far apart. We were in the same place that night, Sophia continued, her grip on his hand tightening like she was afraid he'd vanish. The night you found me in the alley. Your mother was there too. No, that couldn't be right. Theo's mother had died on a business trip across the city, nowhere near his office, nowhere near that alley. But Sophia's next words shattered everything he thought he knew. After you helped me escape those men, I ran. Sophia's voice was thick with tears, each word a struggle. I was terrified they'd follow me home, that they'd find me again. So I didn't go home. I just ran. I ended up in a parking garage a few blocks away, one of those tall structures attached to an office building. I thought I'd be safe there, thought I could hide until morning. She paused, her breathing ragged. But they found me. Different men, but connected to the first ones, more dangerous. They cornered me on the top level of the garage. I was trapped, nowhere to run, and I knew this time no one would save me. Theo's heart pounded so hard he thought it might give him away, but he couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but listen as his world fell apart. Then she appeared. A woman. She'd been leaving late from her job in the building, walking to her car. She heard me screaming, and she came running. Sophia sobbed, her whole body shaking. She didn't hesitate, didn't look for security or call for help first. She just ran straight toward us, started yelling at the men, told them she'd already called the police, that they needed to leave. She had called them. I heard the sirens later, but the men, they didn't care. They tried to grab me anyway, tried to push past her. And your mother, Barbara Brennan, she physically put herself between us. Theo felt his breath stop completely. Barbara Brennan, his mother's name, spoken by this crying woman beside his bed, in the context of a story that couldn't be real, but was. She stood in front of me like a shield, Sophia continued, her voice breaking into pieces. Told them they'd have to go through her to get to me. And they did. In the struggle, they pushed her. She fell backward. There was a ledge, the barrier along the edge of the top level. She went over. Sophia's voice dropped to a whisper. 5 stories down. The parking garage, the fall, 5 stories. That's what had killed his mother. Not some vague accident on a business trip. She'd fallen from a parking garage while protecting a stranger. I didn't know she was your mother, Sophia said desperately, like she needed him to understand. Not then. She was just this brave woman who died protecting me, a stranger who gave her life for mine. The men ran when she fell. The police arrived minutes later. I told them everything, but I was just a scared kid with no real information. I didn't know her name, didn't know anything about her, except that she died because of me. Sophia's tears fell harder, landing on Theo's hand in a steady rhythm. Years later, when I finally tracked you down, when I found out where you lived and who you'd become, I researched everything about you. Your history, your family, your past, and I saw her obituary, her photo. Barbara Brennan died in a tragic accident, and I realized the woman who saved my life, who died protecting me, was your mother. Theo felt something crack inside him, a fissure running through the foundation of everything he'd built his life on. I wanted to tell you when I first got hired, Sophia said, her voice raw with guilt. But how do you say that to someone? How do you walk up to a man and tell him, your mother died saving me. I'm the reason she's gone. I thought you'd hate me, she whispered. Thought you'd look at me and see the person who got your mother killed. Thought you'd send me away and I'd never get the chance to tell you the truth, but I couldn't leave without saying it. You deserve to know your mother was a hero, that she didn't die for nothing, that she died doing something brave and selfless and exactly the kind of thing you did for me years later. Theo couldn't hold it anymore. 26 years of guilt crashed over him, 26 years of wondering and incomplete grief and believing he'd somehow failed his mother. But she hadn't died in a random, senseless accident. She died protecting someone who couldn't protect themselves. She died doing exactly what she'd always taught Theo to do, what she'd modeled his entire childhood. Be kind, be brave, stand up for people who need you. The kindness he'd shown Sophia that night 12 years ago, the instinct that made him run toward danger instead of away from it, he'd learned that from his mother. And his mother had shown that same kindness, that same courage, and paid the ultimate price. Tears slipped from Theo's closed eyes before he could stop them. Hot, silent tears that traced down his temples, into his hair. He couldn't hold them back anymore, couldn't maintain the pretense, couldn't keep playing dead when his entire world had just been turned inside out. Sophia gasped. Mr. Brennan? Her voice was suddenly terrified, panicked. Oh God, you're awake. You heard everything. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have. I should go. I'll leave right now. But Theo's hand tightened around hers, holding her in place even though he still hadn't opened his eyes. Because if he opened them, if he looked at her, he didn't know what he'd see. The woman his mother died protecting? The reason his mother was gone? Or the living proof that his mother's sacrifice had meant something? That her death had saved a life? That her kindness had created a ripple that had lasted 26 years and brought this woman back to him? Theo's chest heaved with silent sobs, tears flowing freely now, and he knew he couldn't pretend anymore. He had to face this, had to face her, had to face the truth that had just shattered and rebuilt his entire understanding of who his mother was and why she died and what it all meant. Theo opened his eyes. His voice came out hoarse, raw with emotion. Sophia. She jumped back like she'd been burned, the damp cloth dropping from her hands onto the floor. Her face went pale, eyes wide with terror. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. I'll leave right now. I never should have said anything. Theo weakly reached out, his hand catching her wrist before she could pull away completely. Don't. His grip was gentle but firm. Please don't leave. Sophia froze, staring at him in absolute shock. Her entire body trembled, tears still streaming down her face, caught between the desperate need to run and the physical impossibility of moving with his hand on her wrist. You heard everything? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Everything, Theo confirmed. His eyes, red-rimmed and wet with tears, met hers. Every single word. Sophia broke down completely. She collapsed into the chair beside his bed, her hands covering her face as sobs tore through her. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I never should have told you. I've ruined everything. You must hate me. I took your mother from you." Theo sat up slowly, his body still weak from exhaustion, but determination overriding the physical limitations. He reached out and gently pulled her hands away from her face, forcing her to look at him. "Stop apologizing." His voice was firm despite the tears still falling. "You have nothing to apologize for. Nothing." Sophia shook her head violently, trying to pull away, but Theo held on. "My mother made a choice," he said, his voice breaking. "A brave choice, the kind of choice she raised me to make. She saw someone in danger and she didn't hesitate. She didn't calculate the risk or wonder if it was worth it. She just acted. That's who she was." Sophia sobbed harder, "But she died because of me. If I hadn't been there, if those men hadn't chased me, she'd still be alive." "She died protecting you," Theo interrupted, his own voice thick with emotion. "That's who she was. That's what she would have wanted. Don't you dare diminish her choice by calling it your fault." Theo's hands were shaking as he held Sophia's, both of them crying now, 26 years and 12 years of guilt pouring out between them. "I've spent 26 years wondering if her death meant something," Theo said, his voice raw and honest in a way it hadn't been since he was 16. "Wondering if I failed her somehow. If I should have been there. If her death was just random and senseless and meaningless." He looked directly into Sophia's eyes. "You just gave me the answer I've needed my whole adult life. She was a hero. She died saving you, and you're here, you're alive. You're proof that her sacrifice mattered." Sophia stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. "And you," Theo continued, his voice softening, "you're a hero too, for having the courage to tell me, for carrying this guilt alone for 12 years, for finding me when I'd made myself impossible to find, for staying even when you were terrified I'd hate you." "I don't understand," Sophia whispered. "You're not angry? I took your mother from you." Theo shook his head, a sad smile crossing his face. "You didn't take her from me. Life took her, circumstance took her, evil men took her. But you gave me something I haven't had in 26 years. He squeezed her hands gently. "You gave me back my mother's memory. The real memory, not the incomplete, sanitized version I've been living with. You showed me she died being exactly who she was. Brave, selfless, kind. That's a gift, Sophia, not a curse. And you showed me something I'd forgotten," he continued, his voice gaining strength. "That kindness matters. That connection matters. I've spent years building walls around myself, convinced that emotions were weakness, that caring about people would only lead to pain." He gestured around the empty, cold bedroom. "I turned myself into a ghost in my own life because I was terrified of feeling anything. But you," he looked at her intently, "you've been carrying this burden completely alone. You tracked me down, got a job in my house, worked beside me for weeks, all while holding this secret that was tearing you apart. That takes more strength than anything I've ever done in my entire life." Sophia was crying again, but differently now. Not the desperate, guilty tears from before. Something softer. Something that looked almost like relief. "Stay," Theo said suddenly. The word came out urgent, almost pleading. "Please, not as my employee, as my friend." Sophia blinked at him through her tears. "What?" "I don't have those anymore," Theo admitted, and the vulnerability in his voice was striking. "Friends, people who know me, people who see me as something other than a bank account or a business opportunity." "I don't have anyone, Sophia, but you're the only person who's ever truly seen me, who's seen past all the walls, and the coldness, and the reputation. You see me the way I was before I built all this armor. And I need that. I need you to stay." Sophia nodded slowly, tears still falling but a small smile breaking through. "I'll stay," she said, her voice steadying, "but only if you promise to take care of yourself. Your mother saved me. I can't let you destroy yourself with this lonely, isolated life. That would make her sacrifice meaningless. Theo let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. A genuine laugh, rusty and surprised, like he'd forgotten what his own laughter sounded like. Deal, he said, and the word felt like a promise, like the beginning of something neither of them had expected, but both desperately needed. 6 months passed. The Brennan estate looked different now, though the changes were subtle enough that a casual observer might not notice right away. The spaces felt less like a museum and more like a home. Books left open on tables, coffee cups on the kitchen counter, laughter echoing through rooms that had been silent for years. Sophia was still there, but everything had changed. She wasn't an employee anymore. She was Theo's companion, his confidant, the person who'd helped him remember how to be human. She'd encouraged him to reconnect with the world slowly, carefully. He'd started having actual conversations with his staff instead of issuing cold commands. He'd attended a charity gala and actually smiled during it. He'd even reconnected with a few old acquaintances he'd pushed away years ago. And Theo had helped Sophia too, in ways she hadn't expected. Helped her release the crushing guilt she'd carried. Helped her see that surviving wasn't something to apologize for. That living a full life wasn't dishonoring Barbara Brennan's sacrifice, but honoring it. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that one act of kindness can ripple across decades, subscribe to True Soul Narratives for more stories that celebrate the power of human connection. On a bright Saturday morning, they drove together to Cedar Grove Cemetery. It had become a monthly ritual, this visit. Theo parked the car and they walked side by side to a grave marked with a simple but elegant headstone. Barbara Ann Brennan, beloved mother, 1965 to 1999. Theo knelt down, placing fresh flowers against the stone. White lilies, his mother's favorite. Sophia stood beside him, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. "Thank you," Theo said quietly, speaking to the stone as if his mother could hear him, "for teaching me everything that mattered, for showing me what real courage looks like, for being exactly who you were until the very end." Sophia knelt beside him, adding her own flowers to the arrangement. "And thank you for raising someone who remembered those lessons," she said softly, "who grew up to be kind even when the world gave him every reason not to be, who saved me twice, once with his actions and once with his forgiveness." They stayed there for a few minutes in comfortable silence. Two people connected by tragedy and healing, by loss and love, by the invisible threads that tie human lives together in ways we rarely understand. Finally, they stood and walked back toward the car. Theo's hand found Sophia's, not romantic, but something deeper. A bond forged through shared grief and mutual salvation. They walked away together from Barbara Brennan's grave, carrying her memory forward, not as a burden, but as a gift. Two people who'd saved each other across time. Theo had saved Sophia from danger 12 years ago without knowing it would matter. Barbara had saved Sophia with her life, creating a debt that could never be repaid but could be honored. And Sophia had saved Theo from the prison of his own loneliness, from a life spent behind walls so high he'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen. As they drove away from the cemetery, Theo glanced over at Sophia. She was looking out the window, a peaceful expression on her face so different from the terrified, guilty woman who'd sat beside his bed 6 months ago. "You okay?" he asked. She turned to him and smiled. "Yeah," she said simply. "I really am." "Me too," Theo replied, and meant it. Because kindness never dies. It doesn't disappear when the person who showed it is gone. It just waits, patient and persistent, until the right moment to return. Until the right person remembers. Until two broken people find each other and realize that healing isn't something you do alone. It's something you do together, one honest conversation, one act of forgiveness, one shared memory at a time. What would you do if you discovered a connection like this to someone from your past? Would you have the courage to tell them? Let us know in the comments. And as Theo and Sophia drove back to the estate that was finally starting to feel like home, the sun broke through the clouds, casting light across the road ahead. A reminder that even after the darkest nights, morning always comes. And sometimes, just sometimes, it brings exactly the person you didn't know you needed.